Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. My Car, submitted by Tristan O. This is a messed up story that happened to me in the late 80s. My name is Tristan, but my friends call me Tris. I know, kind of a girly name, but my parents are off the boat from England. Anyway, my dad was a car enthusiast and was an engineer for a major auto company that I won't name. I also got into cars at a young age and became a mechanic, and when my grandfather died, he left us all a substantial amount of money. My parents made me save most of it for college, but when I was 16, I was allowed to use the money to buy my first car. I was in love with a Buick Grand National, and I had enough money to pay for a T-Type in 1986. If my mother had known more about that car, I'm sure she would have said, "No way are you buying that." For those of you who don't know, at the time, the Buick Grand National was the fastest production vehicle made. I'm not going to get into all the specs that only motorheads would enjoy, but I did a lot of modifications on it, and also did my fair share of illegal street racing. I know, young, stupid, with an unbelievably fast vehicle. What a mix. But here's where things started to go creepy. I met a girl who I had not really known growing up, but met her at a school event. She was not really like me at all, kind of a badass chick that ran with a completely different crowd than me. She was very, very pretty, and I was kind of taken aback that she liked me. I mean, we were just very different, but somehow we clicked. Or so I thought. We did all the normal dating things, movies, dinners, dances, stuff like that, and we would drive around and make out in my car and go a little further. The first incident happened when we were parked in a local park, just making out and talking. I noticed this red pickup that kept driving by the secluded area we were in. And if I can explain it, we were parked next to a pavilion off of the main park road. It was kind of like a loop with the pavilion on one side and a big field for gatherings or whatever. We always went to this one because it was kind of in the back of the park and not a lot of people usually were there. It was easier to have sex knowing that no one was ever going through that turnaround. But, like I said, I noticed this red pickup kept driving around the loop. I asked her if it was her father or something, and maybe he was checking on her, and she said no and that it was no big deal, I shouldn't pay attention to it. As the evening turned into night, we had to leave the park, and I heard a tap on my window. There was a guy there holding up a knife, and I yelled out, "Holy shit!" I looked at my girlfriend, and there was another guy at her door. She didn't say anything, and I immediately just hit the ignition and floored it out of there. When we got to the main road, I saw the red pickup parked off to the side. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the two guys came from that vehicle. Well, like I said, if you're not familiar with it, the Grand National was a pisser, and it didn't take long to get out of the park. There was no way in hell those guys would ever have a chance of catching me. Once I hit the open road, I put my baby through her paces and was long gone. The funny thing was, and I didn't notice it at the time, my girlfriend never said a word until I started hauling ass, and for the first time, she told me that I should slow down. Normally, she loved the thrill of being out on the country roads with me doing well over 100 miles an hour, but now she was asking me to slow down? I did, and realized we needed to just call it a night because it was a school night. So I took her home and went back to my house and parked my car in the carport next to our other two-car garage. I babied that car and always covered it at night, so I quickly put the cover on and then walked down the driveway to the side door of my house. Right before I got inside, I looked up and saw what I believed was the same red pickup that I had seen in the park. We had floodlights in the backyard at that time, and the reason that I mention that is later that night while I was finishing up some homework, those lights went on. My bedroom was in the back of the house, and a window overlooked our yard. When the lights went on, I looked up instinctively, but I also knew that deer passing by or other animals sometimes set the light off. Hell, if my dog had been out there, he would have activated the light. but my dog was right next to me on the floor. So when I looked out the window, I saw two guys standing next to my car, slowly pulling the cover off of it, but now looking up at the floodlights, realizing that they had been busted. I can't say for sure that it was the same guys from the red pickup, but come on. I mean, give me a break. What are those odds? So I jumped up, and I know I'm going into too much detail, but I remember stepping on my dog's tail, and him waking up with a yelp, which attracted the attention of my dad. He came in and asked if everything was all right, and I said, no, there's two guys out by my car. My dad had a number of vehicles at a different garage, but for whatever reason, he had his Alfa Romeo Spider in the garage at that time. His daily driver was parked on the street, and we realized that this was not a good thing. We tore down the stairs and out the side door, but the guys were long gone. I told him what had happened earlier in the evening, and I thought it was the same guys, and he said we should call the police and file a report even though there wasn't anything they could really do. He just thought it was a good idea. We did, and that was all that happened with that. Before I went to bed, my phone rang next to my bed, and it was my girlfriend. She said she just wanted to say goodnight, and I told her what had happened, and I thought it was the same guys from that pickup. She didn't say anything and said, hey, as long as your car is okay, everything is fine. I mean, she did love riding in it, but I think she was always kind of jealous of it too. I know this sounds like that movie Christine, but I wasn't that obsessive about it. But for whatever reason that night, it just seemed like she didn't want to hear anything about my car. About 2 weeks later, we were going to go to dinner in the movies. We left the restaurant and we got to the parking lot of the theater. And as soon as we got there, it dawned on me that she really hadn't said much through our meal and was dead silent on the way over to the theater. The minute that we pulled into a spot, a gang of guys basically surrounded my car. I mean, I knew there was something up at this point. I mean, there was way too much going on to think anything else. There was no one in front of me as far as other cars, and I hadn't yet stopped and put it in park. But one of the guys did get in front of it. There were two guys on the driver's side door and one guy behind me. I mean, my head was on a swivel, and I was trying to make sense of what was happening. I moved my car into neutral and just revved the engine, while the guys on my side of the car told me to get out. There's no way in hell I was getting out of my car, and I thought revving the engine might make everyone take a step back. It did make the guy in front a little nervous, but he just kind of backed up a bit. God, I remember this so clearly. Again, I'm going to mention here that my girlfriend had never said a word and was still not saying anything. So I figured, okay, these assholes need a little smoke show, and that's what I gave them. I lit up the tires and filled the area with smoke and then hit the horn to let the guy in front know that I was going in his direction. While the two guys pounded on the side of my car, I let my baby rip and the guy in front jumped out of the way. Thank God. I blew out of there as fast as my baby would go. When I got to the edge of the parking lot, my girlfriend screamed at me to stop and said, I just want to get out of this car. I looked at her and said, are you nuts? Those guys are crazy. And she said, no, just let me out. She said she was breaking up with me and just wanted me to leave her alone. I said, no way, I'm not leaving you here. I'll take you home. And all the way there, despite her hitting me and calling me all kinds of names, saying how I was a piece of garbage and she didn't even know I was with me, I didn't say a word. I pulled into her driveway. She got out, and at that point she was crying. I was so pissed and offended, just for fun, and also being a dick at that point, I lit my tires up again in her front yard and then drove over to my buddy's house. When I did that, a lot of lights went on in all our neighbors' houses, wondering who was that guy. When I got to my pal's house, I told him what had happened, and we snuck a couple of beers out of the fridge and sat in his basement, and I told him about everything that had been happening. I was so taken aback that she had broken up with me like that, and out of nowhere. I mean, I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on, and where were those guys coming from? Well, that was a Friday night, and by Monday, the buzz was all around school. You know how things are, and you know how people talk. It turns out this girl had been wooing me in an effort to get her real boyfriend to get to my car. He was an older guy. I was 17 at that point, but this guy was like 22 or something, and she basically had been doing everything to set me up so that he could steal my car. I know I don't have any proof of that, but that was the story, and she never talked to me again, and to be honest, I don't ever recall seeing her at my school for my senior year. I know to this day I believe that's the truth, and I think that's really what happened. Thankfully, no one bothered me after that, which is another reason why I think it's true. If that guy and his buddies knew that the word was out and what had happened, I'm sure they would never mess with me or my baby. I got another girlfriend and spent the rest of my high school days fine and still doing a little street racing, but not as much. I mean, people around town knew my car and me, but I wanted to keep it that way, and I didn't want to showboat or show it off to anyone. I still have that vehicle, as well as 2 other Grand Nationals. Nowadays, I just use them to drive, and I have one that is strictly a show car that doesn't go anywhere other than the car shows. I would tell you the model, but I'm sure no one would care that it was a 1987. I love your channel and thought this was appropriate for Valentine's Day, as I know you sometimes do shows about crazy people. I suppose this isn't as scary as a lot of the things you get, but as much as I think back on all of this, during this stuff it was really scary to me that knowing that I put my trust in someone who I was completely vulnerable towards, she still did what she did. And it goes to show you, it's not always the right thing to do to put your trust in people. They can stab you in the back pretty easily. Online dating? Never again. Submitted by Lisa and the Cult Slam. Okay, this one's a doozy. I was in my late 20s and started dating a guy I'd met on a dating site. I know, how cheesy to have to actually go on a dating site because none of the guys I was meeting anywhere that I went were worth my time. If that makes me sound like a bitch, then I'm a bitch. We chatted online and then moved to texting, and then decided to meet in person. He seemed like a really awesome guy. We both had a lot of interests, like exercise and the outdoors and that sort of thing. So I was really happy to find someone that I knew I could go riding bikes with, or go on hikes, camping, and all that kind of thing. For this story, I'll call him Jim. We met in person at a Starbucks and really had a good time. We spent the best part of that evening just drinking coffee and talking, and I was impressed. He seemed to be a very smart guy, witty, and had a great personality. We made plans to go on a bike ride that weekend, and I was really happy with the way things were working out. We did go on our bike ride and then went back to the Starbucks. We decided to keep dating and did so for about 2 months, and we spent a lot of time together, always in the evening, but always doing fun outdoor activities that we both enjoyed. And once in a while on the weekends we would do something new, and one of the things that he introduced me to was paddleboarding. One night, after I hadn't seen him for a couple of days, I texted him and said, "Hey, let's grab a coffee if you can." He texted back and said he couldn't do it until after 8 o'clock that night, but he would meet me at the Starbucks we always went to. I got there and sat down and was just playing around on my phone before he got there and sat down. For whatever reason, he looked a little off, and I asked him if everything was okay, and he said, "Yeah, sure," smiled, and then just started talking about other things. I needed to use the bathroom, so I excused myself, but when I came back out, there was another woman standing next to Jim. She was not happy, and she was screaming in his face. I stood watching for a minute, and then went over to see what the fuck was going on. This woman turned around and slapped me in the face, and then started crying, saying that she was sorry. I was totally confused. This woman just slapped me in the face and then said she was sorry, and then she just stormed out of the Starbucks. Jim just looked at me, and I said, "What the fuck was that?" That's when the woman came back in, storming the entire time, with keys in her fingers. She took another swing at me and then took a swing at Jim. I kind of fell back onto my butt, so she missed, but then she jumped on me and started pounding me with her other hand that didn't have the keys. By this time, Jim had jumped up, and other people from the Starbucks got in and pulled her off of me. The police had already been called, and I was just not knowing what the fuck I was supposed to do. I mean, Jim hadn't even said a word up to this point. Well, here's what happened. Jim had been living a double and almost triple life. He was married and had a family of 4 kids, and also had a previous wife with 2 other kids. Neither of those families knew anything about this until the woman from this current relationship found out and brought it to light. He had left his laptop open or something, and she had seen the contact he had had with me and did a little deeper dive. Now here's the scary part on my end. After all the police reports were filed and I was checked out by paramedics to see if I was okay, I went back to my apartment, and hanging from the doorknob to my place was a bag. In it was what I was finally told was a cow heart with a giant spike through it. Jim's wife had found out where I lived and left that there for me. Then she came to the Starbucks. How she found out we were there, I'll never know. But that's when the assault took place, and I'll have no idea how long that woman had been following us around, but I shudder to think what might have happened had things not gone to the head the way that they had at the coffee shop. What else could she have done to me if she knew where I lived, knew where I hung out, and maybe Jim wouldn't be around to step in? I never again went online dating, and I will never ever recommend it to anybody. I have no idea what happened with Jim, and I really don't fucking care. All I know was that I was in fear for my life. Even after up to a month after that, I was wondering if that woman was going to come back to find me someplace else. I mean, if she was willing to attack me in a public place and do something that creepy at my apartment, what else was she capable of? It's been many years now, and I try not to think about it. A Guy Named Ron, submitted by Tara. Hey, Uncle Jay. I wanted to share this story with you. I haven't told this to too many people. I mean, my good friends and family know about it, but it's not something that I ever really bring up in conversation as I got older. I hope you read it. Just before my 18th birthday, I was hanging out with my friends and my boyfriend at this little memorial area in our town square. It was a small place with some plaques to honor the people from our town who passed away in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. It was just a place where us kids would hang out, and the cops would eventually come and say we had to leave when it got dark. We knew that, but we would always push the buttons of those guys and would always stay past the time we knew we had to. And I think as much as it might have irritated them, I think they found it funny too. One night, I was there with a bunch of my girlfriends and some of their boyfriends, and this other guy was there that I had never met. I'll call him Ron, it's not his real name. He apparently was friends with one of the guys that was there and quickly took a liking to me. He was very handsome and very nice, and we talked a lot about school and what we were going to do as far as college and that sort of thing. He didn't go to the same school as us. He was going to an apprentice program. I do remember him saying that, and you'll have to forgive me, this happened in the late 90s. Looking back, I realized how immature I was, but I liked this guy immediately and didn't say anything to my boyfriend, even though, through the next couple of days, I was sort of going behind his back to hang out with this new guy, Ron, between my days at home and my job at McDonald's. Ron was super nice, and we had a good time hanging out. And by this time, maybe 5 days later, my boyfriend realized what was going on and immediately broke up with me. And that was it. No drama. We just walked away from each other. And I'm sure that he had more than a few choice words to say, but either way, that was it. Over the next month or so, I started seeing Ron more and more, and eventually started a romantic relationship, if you know what I mean. It got to the point where as soon as my shifts at McDonald's were over, he would come pick me up in the parking lot in his car, and we would immediately go someplace to have sex. This went on well into July. The funny thing is, we never went to Ron's house, and he never really talked about his family. As a young woman, I never stopped to think that this was weird, as I was always talking about my pain-in-the-butt brother and sister and my parents who were finally not being too strict as they had been for most of my life. I guess I was so focused on going off to college and looking forward to that freedom I knew would be there, that I never once stopped to think about who Ron actually was. One night, we were hanging out in that memorial park, and Ron wasn't with me. It was just a bunch of us young people hanging out, smoking cigarettes, and doing the stupid things that young people do. Just before it got dark and we knew the cops were going to come and kick us out, Ron came running up. He was covered in sweat, and as it was in summer in the South, it was very hot out, and I was wondering why he was running like that. He sat down and was catching his breath, and I was asking him if everything was okay. Where was his car? Why was he running? He didn't answer immediately. He just sat there catching his breath and said that his car broke down and he wanted to be here and see me, so he just ran from where he left his car. Again, being a young, naive kid, I didn't see how that was weird at the time. I just rubbed his shoulders, as sweaty as they were. Ew. When it got past dark, of course, one of the cop cars came, cruising by to tell us that we had to beat it, and we all got up laughing. But this time, the officer got out of his car. That had never happened before. I mean, usually when they came over to give us the business, they would just pull up, maybe ask about where we got our cigarettes and that sort of funny thing, but this time it was different. Ron immediately tensed up and jumped to his feet. The cop told him to stay where he was and to not move. And it wasn't like on TV where the cop pulls out his gun and says, "Freeze." It was just this man, looking at my boyfriend of sorts, saying, "Don't move." I looked at Ron and said, "What's going on?" All of my friends had kind of moved off to the side, so it was just the two of us sitting there. The police officer said, "Young lady, on your feet. Get away from him." I once again looked at Ron and said, "Ron, what's going on?" And he said nothing. The officer told me again, and I said, okay, and I moved off to the side, still staring at Ron, wondering what the heck was happening. I remember the officer saying something into his radio while standing next to Ron, who was not saying anything. The next thing I knew, 2 more cars pulled up, and all the cops got out of their cars. One came over and started asking Ron all kinds of questions. But that only went on for a couple of minutes before, next thing I knew, they had Ron in handcuffs and put him in one of the cop cars. At this point, I started yelling, "What are you doing to him? Where are you taking him?" And one of the officers came over to me and told me to be quiet and to just go home. But first he wanted my name, address, and phone number. They also asked the same things for all my friends. Again, as a young kid who didn't really know much about the world, I gave him the information and did what he told me to do. I went home, crying. When I got there, I called my best friend, who also was at that scene, and she had seen everything that went down, and we talked for hours about what was happening, and we couldn't figure out why they had stopped Ron. The next morning, a police car pulled into our driveway, and my mother saw it and called to my father. We were actually just getting ready to head out on a vacation trip, so everybody was just there packing up our things to get ready. My dad went to the door, and the police officer spoke with him for a minute, and then my father called to me to come out onto the porch. We all sat there, and the cop began asking me all kinds of questions about Ron. I mean, a lot of them I couldn't answer because I just didn't know. But the one that hit home was if I had sex with him or not. My father looked at me and said, "Be honest. I'm not going to be mad, but you need to tell the truth." I did and said, "Yes, we've had sex." The cop wrote something down in his notebook and then asked, "When's your birthday?" And I said, "It's not until September." He shook his head and said someone else would be back to speak with me and my parents. My dad told me to go inside, and they talked for another minute or two before he came in. Of course, he was mad, and I got the tongue lashing of a lifetime. And my mother was really upset that I had done what I had done. And then I got the interrogation of a lifetime about who this Ron guy was, how I met him, why they had never heard about him before, why I never brought him to the house, and so on. I remember crying a lot and being sent to my room, even though I was almost 18. I could hear my parents downstairs talking, and I still remember that feeling that I was in such deep shit, and that my parents were so mad at me, maybe they wouldn't even let me go to college. About an hour later, my mom came into my room, sat down and talked to me in a much calmer way. She asked me if we had been having protected sex, and I said yes, and she said, "Well, I'm happy to hear that, but your father is very disappointed in you. We're going to have to work through this." We still ended up going on our trip, but it was a very difficult one. My dad didn't speak to me the entire time, and it was just like that Dirty Dancing movie. Wow. At the end of the trip, my dad did take me on a walk and said basically the same stuff that my mother had. The bombshell was when we got home. Turns out Ron was not my age. Ron was 28. Ron was also a felon. How he became friends with one of my friends, I'll never know, but it looks like he was pretending to be a much younger person than he was. He had befriended some of my friends, and they had accepted him as just another guy from the town over. He had already done a stint in jail for statutory rape, and was now looking at the same thing because I hadn't turned 18 yet. I don't know all the ins and outs of the law, and outside of having to talk to the police a couple of more times and some other officials, I was never called to a trial or anything like that. But that night that Ron ran up to us at that little memorial area, he had just tried to rob a liquor store, and that's what brought the attention of the cops down on him. When they saw that he was hanging out with a bunch of teenagers, obviously bells went off. I know he did jail time, but I never followed up with anyone about it. I just wanted that embarrassing part of my life to be over. I assure you it was embarrassing enough when my friends found out. I was the talk of the town. So I went off to college, tried to put everything behind me, but it did make me a much wiser person, and after that I was not so trustful of everyone who came into my life. But to lose your virginity to a guy who was basically doing something he knew he shouldn't be doing, and was taking advantage of a young, stupid girl, yeah, having to live with that is not the easiest thing. My advice to all young women who listen to your channel is be careful who you hang out with. Be careful with the choices you make. And always make sure you know who you are going to sleep with if you choose to do that, which I also don't recommend until you're older, wiser, and more mature to handle it. So, wherever you are, Ron, let's never meet again. A True Ghost Love Story by Nozomikizumi. This is a personal account of a ghost story that occurred over 10 years ago. This true experience firmly supported my theory that our departed loved ones can convey messages through dreams. Back in 1989, being a fresh graduate of psychology, I landed a job in the personnel department of one of the government offices in Quezon City. A male coworker, Jin, was 11 years older than me. He became one of my friends while working there. Jun was kind, loving, and romantic, and he was the breadwinner of his family. His parents and relatives liked me a lot, and being single and unattached, he courted me in 1990, and I accepted his marriage proposal during the later part of that year. My parents did not approve of our relationship, and when the first quarter of 1991 came, my parents made me quit my job. My dad, being a military man, even threatened Jun to stay away from me. And to make a long story short, I left my job. I lost track of Jun, and I busied myself with the family business. Basically, I went on with my life and tried to forget about him. On the morning of June 2nd, 1994, I received a telegram from his aunt saying that Jun had died the day before. Shocked, I crumpled the short note and hurriedly phoned his aunt for confirmation, and she told me that when we parted, Jun resigned from his job and started drinking heavily each day. He neglected his health as well as his body, and pneumonia came and caused his sudden death. She said, "You know, Jun, every day up to his remaining hours, all he wanted was to see you, and during his final moments while suffering from delirium, he even told us that he still loved you very, very much." Sadly, my parents wouldn't allow me to go to his wake. I just mourned quietly inside my room. There even came a point where I convinced myself that he wasn't dead. In January 1995, just before my birthday, Jun visited me in a dream. I dreamed that I was inside a hospital room, and I was wearing a hospital gown, and I was sitting at the foot of my bed. Jun suddenly appeared before me, clothed in bright light, and we communicated mentally. I told him it wasn't true that he was gone, and he replied that I must accept the fact that he was already dead, but it didn't mean that he was leaving me. "I will always be with you. I will always be beside you, guarding you," he said. I cried, saying, "I'm sorry I didn't have the guts to fight for our relationship." Jun comforted me and soothed me by shrouding me with his bright light, and the bliss I felt was interrupted by a voice calling his name. "It's time for me to go," he said. "What about me?" I asked, tears in my eyes. I will always be here for you. Always, he replied. And I will be waiting for you there. And don't ever forget that I love you very, very much. After saying this, he vanished before my eyes, and I woke up crying. After this incident, I finally accepted his death, and whenever I'm depressed, I feel his presence beside me. I know somehow, somewhere, out there, he's still waiting patiently for me. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story that you would like me to narrate and hear on this channel, please email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to follow me on social media, all the links to that are in the description below. If you'd like to take it a step further and support this channel and keep it ad-free on YouTube, find me on Patreon. The link for that is also in the description. I hope everyone out there is doing well. Another volume is shortly on the way, but I wanted to get this special one out for Valentine's Day as I do every year. Everyone, be excellent to each other. Wash your hands, wear a mask, social distance. We'll get through this together. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.